In this lesson, we'll be working with maps in Dart. So navigate into dartpad.dev so that you can follow along with me. So let's understand what maps are in Dart. So this map is also known as a map object in Dart. Keep that in mind, alright? So Dart map is an object that stores data in a form of key and value pair. So what does this mean? Let's try to understand it by using an example. Say there are 100 students in class. And for now, let's take only one student into consideration whose name is John, alright? So now if I need to describe John to you, then creating a string with student named John might not be a suitable option, because this will not give a clear insight of what John looks like, what is the age of John, what are the characteristics of John, and so on, right? And this is where map object comes into play. So instead of creating a string, I'll be creating a map object for describing John better. So let's remove this and let's create a map for the John object. We always start with curly braces when creating a map, and all characteristics of John will be inside this curly braces, alright? And as this map is a form of key and value pair, let's create a key value pair for John object. So name equals to John. Here the key is name and value is John. So this map object is nothing but a key and value pair, alright? And we can also have multiple key and value pair for describing John better. For instance, age, height, weight, and so on. All key and value pair will be separated by this comma, alright? So instead of defining John by a string, I can use this John object to define John better, because it has all the properties of John, alright? So now let's have a look at how map looks exactly in Dart, alright? So we start by writing this map keyword and the angle brackets, and the first parameter of angle bracket will be the data type of a key. So here you can see all the key are of a string type, so the first data type will be the string, alright? And the second parameter will be the data type of value. As there are different data types, we'll be writing it as dynamic, alright? And now we need to provide a name to this map, so I'll be naming it a John map object, alright? Equals to, and now this is a valid map data in Dart. So now let's work with this map object a little bit. So let's create an entry point, so void main, and let's print this John map object for now, and click at run, and you'll get all the properties of this John object, alright? But what if you only want a single property from this object? And you can access it by using these big brackets and keeping the key inside of it. So here, instead of getting the object, we will be getting the value of a key. And by using key, I can also modify the data of an object. For instance, if I want to modify the age of John, I will do it like so. And here I am changing the age of John to 10. Now instead of printing this name, let me print this John object. And here you can see this age has been modified to 10, alright? I can also add a new property to this object by defining the key. So if I want to add a new property address to this John object, I can define this new key and provide a value to it. So if I run this now, you can see this new key and value pair has been added to our John map object. Now if you want to remove a property or a key value pair from the object, you can use this remove function. So the object name dot remove and then the key. Now this will remove this age property from our object. So here you can see age key and value pair has been removed from our object, alright? So now let's have a look at the previous JSON data to see if it makes any sense now. So after understanding maps in Dart, this data might make a little sense. So here we have this list that is enclosed by these big brackets, and inside of it we have multiple map objects, right? So this first object is a Visit Nepal map object, and this second object is the skydiving map object. So it is safe to say that this JSON data is actually a list of map objects, right? So this list can not only hold the primitive data type like string, number, booleans, and so on, it can also hold advanced data types like map. So now that we have a basic understanding of maps in Dart, we can use it to create a JSON object that can be passed into our server. So in the next lesson, we will be creating a bucket list, which will be a list of map objects, and then we will be passing it into our server. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will be working with map objects for creating a JSON data, and we will be sending it to our server. So let's get started. So now let's start creating some bucket list items. Alright. So the first thing that I want to create is the Visit Nepal map object. So map, open angle bracket, key data type and value data type. Close angle bracket, and then the object name, which is Visit Nepal, equals to curly braces, and let's create a key and value pair inside of this curly braces. So item will be the visit Nepal, cost 10,000 and image equals to some image data. Alright. So now let's duplicate this for creating another bucket list item, which is a skydiving. Let's change all the data inside of it. So now I have these two objects over here. Let's merge them in a single list. So list, angle bracket, and if I want to keep a string inside of it, I'll be writing this string over here, but as it will hold the data of map objects, I'll be providing the map data type over here. So map, string, dynamic, and then angle bracket close. So this is for the map data type, and this angle bracket is for the list. So let's define the list name as bucket list and then the big brackets. Now inside of this big brackets, I want to copy the contents of visit Nepal map object and skydiving map object. Alright. So now let's copy the data from first and second object separated by comma. Alright. So now as this list holds both the data, we can remove these objects from here. So now we have a bucket list which is a list of map objects. So now let's replace this some image data with an actual image URL. So the first item is visit Nepal. So let's search for Nepal wallpaper and open the image, open image in new tab, and make sure this is a JPEG or a PNG image. Copy this and paste it in our image. And then let's do the same for this skydiving as well. So search for the skydiving wallpaper, select the image, open image in new tab, copy the image location and then paste it in the image. So now we have this bucket list over here, and if you see carefully, you can see that we have constructed a JSON data over here. So now we have this bucket list which can be passed as a JSON data into our server. So let's copy this data, and you only need to copy the big brackets and data inside of it. You don't need to copy this list over here. So let's copy it and let's navigate into our Postman, and in this put request, click at this body tab and change this data format to raw and then select JSON over here. Alright, and now you can paste the data that you have copied, and you can click at beautify to format it better. Alright, now there is a rule in JSON that you need to be aware of. You cannot have this comma at the end of objects, meaning that if there are no object or data below it, then this comma is not required. And this Postman will also check for any error on your JSON data, so you don't have to worry about it. Alright, and now we are ready to send this data into our server. For sending the data into our server, we need to define the table name over in our URL where this data needs to be sent. And I need to send this data into my bucket list table, so bucket list.json. Alright, and it is required that we use this .json whenever we are trying to communicate with our real-time database using a REST API. Alright, so bucket list.json. So now we are ready to send data into our server. So let's have a look at our real-time database. And currently we have no data in our database. So let's send that request. So click at send. And here in our response, you can see that we have got this 200 OK status, meaning that data has been successfully sent to our server. Alright. So now if I look at this real-time database, then I can see that this bucket list table has been created, and there are two bucket list data over here that we sent from Postman. Alright. So now let's work on getting this data on our Postman. Alright, so navigate into Postman again and then duplicate this. So right click and click at duplicate, and let's rename this to get bucket list. And now let's change this method to get, because we'll be using get for getting the data, and let's keep this as none. Alright, so we are trying to get the data from bucket list.json. So click at send, and you can see the data from our real-time database. And it is a list of objects formatted in JSON. Alright, so we send data and get data in JSON format while communicating with the server. Alright, so that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be creating a new project and start working with API requests. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So now that we have our API ready, let's go ahead and start a new project. So open up a terminal or command prompt in your Flutter project directory. So Flutter, create app name, /org, and then organization identifier. Alright, so now that the project is created, let's close our terminal, open up the project directory, and then open command prompt or terminal in our project directory, code dot, and this will open up a Visual Studio Code. And if it doesn't, then you can open Visual Studio Code and open this folder. Alright, so now let's repeat the process. So navigate into main.dart and clear everything, create an entry point void main, and then inside of this main function run app, which will be imported from material.dart, and the app name will be my app. So now let's create a stateful widget for this my app. Rename this my widget, Ctrl D to select everything, and then my app. So now let's replace this placeholder with a material app. So inside of this material app, we'll have this home argument and we'll pass a new class over here. So let's create that class, new file, and then the class name will be main screen.dart. And we'll create a stateful widget inside of this class and rename this my widget to main screen. And now let's bring this main screen class into the home argument. So main screen, and then import it from main screen.dart. And we'll be using light theme in this project. So theme equals to theme data.light. And we'll be using material3 over here. So use material3 true. So now let's move into main screen.dart and replace this placeholder with an scaffold. And now let's import this scaffold from material.dart. And now let's create a app bar in our scaffold. So app bar equals to app bar with a text widget as a title. So title equals to text widget with the text bucket list. So now let's launch up our emulator through command palette. So Ctrl Shift P and then launch emulator. So after the emulator is launched, let's start debugging. So for debugging, you can open up the command palette and type start debugging and then select this. You don't have to always go to this run and then start debugging, alright? Here our app is running fine without any issues. So now we are ready for making HTTP request or calling API from our app. So now let's open up the Postman, and the first thing we'll be working on will be this get request get bucket list, alright? So this is the URL. Let's send the request. And we have a response here with a few bucket list items. So our first goal is to make this request from our app and getting the response from the API. So for making HTTP request from our app, we need a package. So let's explore some packages in pop.dev. So the first option is this HTTP package, which can be used for making HTTP requests from our app. This is a lightweight package and is widely used by Flutter developers. You are free to use this package, but I personally recommend that you use this DO package. This is powerful and advanced package for making HTTP requests from our app, alright? This is as popular as HTTP package and is widely used by Flutter developers. And I personally recommend this package because it is easier to use and it has way many features compared to this HTTP package, which will be helpful in our further development. Alright, so let's install this package. So let's copy this and use it in our terminal. Once the package has been installed, let's hard restart our app. So now we need to provide internet permission in our app. So search for internet permission Android, and internet permission tag will look something like this. You can get this tag from anywhere, alright? So copy this tag. Now move into VS Code, Ctrl P and search for Android manifest.xml and make sure it's inside of this main directory. And we'll be using that tag just above this application tag, alright? So just above this application tag, paste the permission tag. So you can provide some spacing here, but it's not necessary. But it will look better, alright? So save this XML file, and now we have permission of internet in our Flutter app. And now we are done with this XML file, so let's close it and let's hard restart our app. Once hard restart is done, let's create a button in our scaffold body so that when it is clicked, we can get data from the internet. So we'll have this body argument with elevated button inside of it. On pressed, we'll have an anonymous function, and child will be a text widget with text get data. So now we have this get data button over here. So instead of using anonymous function in elevated button, let's create a new function get data and pass this function in our onPressed. So now let's import do package in our main screen.dart. So import package do.dart. And now when this get data button is clicked and this function is triggered, we want to get data from the API. But before doing that, we need to understand asynchronous programming first. And we also need to understand concepts like async, await and future in Dart. So for that and more, I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be understanding the concept of synchronous and asynchronous programming, and also we'll get familiar with concepts like async, await and future in Dart. So open up your Dart pad so you can follow along with me. Now let's get started by understanding the concept of synchronous programming and asynchronous programming and finding the difference between them, alright? And I'll try to explain it using an example. So let's create an entry point first, and here I'll be using 3 print statements. So the first one is task 1 is complete, and let's duplicate it and change the numbers. So now if I run this code, what we expect it to display is that at first task 1 complete will be printed, and then task 2 and then task 3, right? So if I run this, then I get the same expected behavior in my output, right? But what if I delete the code execution? Say for instance, I want to print this task 2 completed after few seconds. So let's try delaying code execution, and we can do that in Dart by using future.delayed. And we'll have this parenthesis over here, and the first argument will be the duration. So duration, and inside of this parenthesis we will be defining the seconds it needs to be delayed. So seconds, I want to delay it for 3 seconds, so 3. And the second argument will be the function. So let's pass anonymous function over here. Alright. Now any code that you keep inside of this anonymous function will be executed only after 3 seconds. Alright. So let me move this task to complete inside of this anonymous function. So it executes only after 3 seconds. Alright. So we have this task 1 complete over here. And then inside of this future delayed, we have this task 2 complete, meaning that it will be executed only after 3 seconds. Let me change this to 1. So it will take 1 second to print this task 2 is complete. And then after that, I'll be getting this task 3 complete, right? So this is the expected behavior. So at first task 1 complete will be printed, and then there will be 1 second delay, and then task 2 complete will be printed, and then finally task 3 complete will be printed, right? So now let's execute this code. And here you can see a rather strange behavior. Tasks 1 and 3 are completed first, and then task 2 is completed after 1 second delay. And this is totally unexpected. This has occurred due to a nature of asynchronous programming. So let me explain, and I want you to note this. So in asynchronous programming, every code runs independently. There is no blocking in asynchronous programming, meaning that asynchronous programming will not wait for the code execution. In other end, if I had the same code in synchronous programming, in PHP for example, we will have got the desired result, because in synchronous programming, codes are executed in a synchronous order, meaning sequentially. In synchronous programming, if there is a delay in certain part of the code, it will wait for that code to complete and then only move forward with executing other part of the code. But in asynchronous programming, each code will run independently, meaning that nothing can hold the execution of another code. So that is the difference between asynchronous programming and synchronous programming. And because this asynchronous programming works on non-blocking mechanism, it is way faster than synchronous programming like PHP. Having been said that, asynchronous programming has one major disadvantage. So what is that disadvantage? Let's have a look. So by using this future delayed, we are intentionally delaying our code, right? But what if this code was to get a response from an API? And then after getting response from an API, I want to print the response in my debug console. Now this will be a major issue in asynchronous programming, because in asynchronous programming, code will run independently without blocking, right? So now if I run this code, task 1 complete will be printed first, and then our code will try to get the data from the internet or from the API, but this print response will be printed first. So the response will be null or empty, right? Because in asynchronous programming, our code will run independently without waiting for another code to complete. But this should not be an issue with asynchronous programming, because in synchronous programming, everything will run in a synchronous order. So for fixing this issue, we need a synchronous programming behavior, meaning that in certain part of our asynchronous programming code, we need to run code in a synchronous order. So we need to request Dart to wait for the execution of this code before moving forward with other code below this line. Alright? And we can do that in Dart by using this await statement. Alright? So by using this await, we are requesting Dart to wait for certain time before executing the code below it. So without completion of this code, Dart cannot move with execution of other code below it. So whenever we use this await statement inside of a function, that function must be of async type. So between the parenthesis and curly bracket of a function, we use this async statement. By using this async statement in a function, we are notifying Dart that there are code inside of this function that might take some time to execute. Alright? So if you are using await statement inside of a function, this function must be of async type. So let me comment this print for now. And now if I run this code, you can see that task 1 is complete. There is a delay of 1 second, and then task 2 and 3 is complete. Alright. So by using async and await statement, we got the desired results. So now if this delay was for an actual API request, then this response will show the data from the API. Alright. So there's one thing we need to keep in mind while working with an async function. So when a function is async, we need to wrap this return type with a future. So future, open angle bracket, and this return type needs to be wrapped with this angle brackets of future. By using this future statement in our function, we are notifying Dart that there are code inside of this function that might delay, and if there is something to be returned from this function, this might take some time to return, and it will be returned in the future. Alright. So the future keyword. and as we are returning nothing from here, and this function was originally a void, so future void. Alright, so in the next lesson we will be using this async await and future statement for getting the results from our API. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So now that we have an understanding of async await and future, we are ready for making API requests from our app. So navigate into main screen.dart and let's import do package over here. So import package do.dart. And now we are ready for making API requests from do. So first we'll be working on getting data from API. So now let's move into Postman to see the get request. So the first request we'll be working on will be this get bucket list. So let's send the request. So our API is working fine and we are getting this response. So now we will try to send the same request from our app. So method for this request is a get method, and this is an API endpoint. So let's copy it and let's move to VS Code. So we'll be making this get request inside of this get data function. So let's start working on it. So do parenthesis and then the method. We can use get, patch, delete or any method over here. But for now, as we are trying to use the get method, we'll be writing this get and then the parenthesis, and inside of it will be the API endpoint that we just copied from Postman. Alright. So let's end this with a semicolon. So whenever we are making a request to our API from do package, this will return some data and we need to save that data in a variable. And for now we are not sure what data we'll be getting from the API, so we'll be just using this var keyword, alright, for creating a variable. So var response equals to do.get. So now let's print this response. So now let's save our code. And now if I click at this get button, everything is fine in our code, but our debugger has been paused. Even though the debugger might not be paused on your side, it might pause eventually in the course of development without any reason. Alright. And when a debugger is paused, you cannot use anything on your emulator unless you click this continue button. But why is this debugger paused in the first place? We have nothing wrong with our code, so why is it paused? And this is because when we are using advanced packages like do or any other advanced packages, there are a lot of dependencies, right? And there are a lot of code inside of it, and there might be some minor issues inside of it and unhandled exceptions. This might be the reason for our debugger being paused. There is nothing wrong with our code, but this debugger might pause eventually. So the best way to handle this issue is to navigate into this debug tab and uncheck this uncaught exception. Alright. So save the code and then hot restart the app. So now that our debugger issue is fixed, we can continue with the app. Alright. So now if I click at this get data, you can see that in debug console I am getting this future response dynamic. I am not getting the API response in my debug console. Why is that? And this is because of asynchronous behavior of Dart. Here, without waiting for this code to execute, without getting the data from the internet, our print response has been triggered first. So we are getting this future dynamic in our debug console. So we need to use this await statement for instructing Dart that this part of the code might take some time to execute, and before executing this part of the code, you cannot move below with other code execution. Alright. So if this is an await, our function need to be of async type. So async. So as the function is of async type and there are code inside of it that might take some time for the execution, and if there is something to return, it will be returned in the future. So we need to wrap this return type with a future statement. So future and then the angle brackets. So now if I click at this get data, I'll be getting the exact response from the API. So here instead of using this bar data type, we can use this response data type, which is provided by do package. This data type can be used to store the response data from this do package. Alright. And by using this response data type, we can explore other response data from the request like status code. So now if I click at this get data, I'll be getting this 200 OK status. So this is a status code and the actual data will be saved on response.data. So this response.data is an actual response from the API. So whenever we are making request from do, we will be using this response data type and then response.data for getting the data from an API. Alright. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on error handling in Dart. So I'll see you at the next lesson.